Our freedom of conscience and religion is being challenged by laws and regulations imposed by secular society. It's time to hear from the top Christian litigators in the nation who have come forward to tell us the truth and help us defend our faith.
Hear ye, hear ye. All rise. Faith on Trial with Defender of the Faith, Deacon Mike Mano, is in session.
Thank you for joining us today. This is Faith on Trial, where we examine the influence of law and society on people of faith. And a special thank you to all of those people who are joining us for the first time this week. I'm Deacon Mike Mano, your host, and I'm here with Gina No, our co-host. Gina, how are you doing today?
I'm well today, Deacon Mike. Yes, quite a bit going on in the news against people of faith again this week.
Yes, yeah.
It doesn't seem to slow down.
What is new? We're going around with targets on our back, I think. And
yes, absolutely.
Speaking of targets, Target stores are taking it in the shorts these days, too.
Yes,
yeah.
It sounds like
There is a pushback among people, and I don't know if that's going to help religious liberty or not, but it's going to help us with some of the societal issues that we face.
Yeah, and sadly, I've been listening to quite a bit of analysis on some of these attacks, and these Okay, so from the perspective of the advertising department of these corporate entities, they're struck. I mean, they know who their target audience is, and that's who they want to cater to, and their skills are honed to do those kinds of things. And yet they have their investors telling them, no, you need to wrap your arms around this disordered message. And they know they're going to lose their...
You know where their investors are? Those big firms like BlackRock that are promoting a woke agenda in corporate governance. And that's where the push is really coming from. And when there was a bill in Congress not too long ago that would eliminate that type of investment, it was voted down. I won't tell you which side voted it down, but it was voted down.
Yeah, I know the Iowa legislature took a look at divesting a lot of their funds from these what they call ESG, Environmental
ESGs, right,
Society, Geo something companies. So. I feel for the marketing directors who know how to do their jobs and are not being able to do them the way they.
I do too, and I just got a Kohl's card. Bought a suit and bought some other things at Kohl's, and I got a Kohl's card. And now I'm seeing all this stuff come through about Kohl's too. So I'm wondering, am I ever going to use that Kohl's card?
Well, yeah, it's very difficult to avoid it at this point. Yeah. And this month, it's just going to be worse because it's Pride Month, and then
and you see what's happening with the Dodgers, the Los Angeles Dodgers.
Yeah,
but that's a little squib thing to talk about later. But
not the we will. Well, that's good. I'm glad we'll get to that. But it's so much. It's such a degradation of women, women who have consecrated their lives towards holiness. It's.
Yeah, for you, those who don't know what we're talking about, the Los Angeles Dodgers have voted or have invited during Pride Month I guess they call themselves the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence.
An LBGT group that wants to desecrate the Catholic theology.
Right. And what they do is they have a program where they dance around a cross where somebody apparently is crucified, and they use it like a stripper's pole. I mean, these are
sacrilegious activities for sure.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
And so the Dodgers have invited them and are giving them the Community Hero Award,
right?
Whatever
because
that means.
I think they have a soup kitchen and they do some work for people with HIV. But from what I understand, they mostly take their contributions to pay their own salaries.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is very different than the true nuns in the Catholic faith.
We'll talk about that a little later. We're also going to try and get somebody on one of these next programs because their appearance at Dodger Stadium isn't for another couple of weeks. See if we can get somebody up to talk about what the Catholic response to that is, because I know the Archbishop there,
Corleone, yes,
has
and Bishop
criticized
Barron.
Bishop Barron.
The Diocese of Los Angeles.
They've written letters.
Mm-hmm.
They've written letters. Now, what other action they're going to take,
Well, I do know that some of the players in the Major League Baseball have stepped out and proclaimed their faith and talked about how They just want to play baseball, and they find it abhorrent that
and that's all we want to see.
That their employer would come out and attack a religious group.
Now, of course,
blatantly.
as a diehard Phillies fan, I'm never unhappy to see something untoward happen to the Dodgers. But
look at that.
This has nothing to do with what happens on the. Yeah, there is a silver lining for us. Let's talk about what's coming up today.
Yeah,
we're
today
going to be joined by
stories.
Andrea Picciotti-Bayer, who we've had on before. She's a religious liberty expert. She's a legal analyst for EWTN, and she is a fellow with the Institute for Human Ecology, and she's going to talk to us about an article that she wrote a week ago about how the left is trying to maneuver around Supreme Court decisions. And that's going to be interesting, especially with her background. And then we've got a very disturbing story, and we're going to talk to Dr. Jules Gomes, who is the Rome correspondent for Church Militant and St. Michael's Media, on this Australian territory that has decided to take over a Catholic hospital forcibly because the Catholic hospital will not perform abortions and do other services that they think is essential.
Crazy. I can't wait to hear this story because it scares me what will come after that.
Yeah. And we've seen some of this happen in our country. They haven't tried to take over the hospitals as much as they have sued to try and force them to do things. And I remember one time they sued over a merger because the dominant partner of the merger was a Catholic institution. They tried to block the merger. So we will see what happens. This is going to get
Not to mention putting out the candle at the base of the Eucharist.
That's right. Yeah, the altar candle.
Our hospitals are under attack, our Catholic hospitals.
Everything Catholic is under attack. So in light of that, open us up with a prayer.
No kidding. I have a prayer for peace today in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. God of peace, bring your peace into our violent world, peace into the hearts of all men and women, and peace among the nations of this earth. Turn to your way of love those whose hearts and minds are consumed with hatred. Strengthen us all in hope, and give us the wisdom and courage to work tirelessly for a world where true peace and love reign among the nations and in the hearts of all. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Gina. And we will be right back after these messages with Andrea Picciotti-Bayer from the EWTN news analysis and author. Okay, you're listening to Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio. We'll be right back. And we're back. You're listening to Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio. And with us right now is Andrea Picciotti-Bayer, who is a religious freedom expert. She's written an article that we want to talk about how the left is trying to outmaneuver the U.S. Supreme Court. Andrea, thank you for joining us again. We must have treated you good last time because you came back.
You treated me wonderfully. Thank you so much for having me on again.
Certainly. Anytime. All right, you wrote an article about how the left is trying to, outmaneuver the Supreme Court, and you used several examples in that. A very good article, and everybody should read it if they can. It was posted on,
National Catholic
Register's website, and you can read it there. But Andrea, you want to give us kind of the overview of what is going on?
I'd love to, and thank you so much for highlighting the piece. And I've been blessed to be able to write for the Register on religious freedom issues, especially when they make it to our courts for a while now. Mm-hmm. So I'd encourage all of your listeners to look at the website and look at the archive there. The basic thing is the Supreme Court term for this term will be coming to a close. And there are two important religious freedom cases, one involving the free speech protection and the other involving Title VII, which is the federal discrimination in employment law and its requirement for religious accommodations. But basically, it gave me a chance to reflect. Sometimes we hear of these great victories, which have been coming more and more often with this Supreme Court, but it's not the end of the story.
Never.
And obviously that shouldn't lead us to become desperate or despondent. It should lead us to think realistically that we need to, as far as advancing the cause of religious freedom, continue to work in the court system and be dogged even after a victory happens.
I agree. I have often said on this program, Andrea, that the courts can't solve a moral issue in our country. It's the hearts and minds of all of us that need to work to change our attitudes and our paradigms and our vision of the truth.
No, and that's the charge for us as believers in general, right?
Right.
Especially when we're spreading the good news. Oftentimes we just need to keep being persistent, speaking truth in charity, and being patient with people. And when we're dealing with something as complex as American society today, with more and more of our fellow citizens, our neighbors, not having a relationship with organized religion at all, talking about the importance of faith in our own lives may be the first time people think about what faith can do in their own.
I think what has been going on in this country in the last few years is kind of isolating people from faith. In other words, we've been pushing God and faith out of so many institutions and so many places that it's not something people easily bring up.
You're absolutely right, Deacon. And the greatest thing in tracking some of these religious freedom cases that find their way up to our nation's highest court is oftentimes it's religious people or organizations that allow people to think about some of the conflicts that are happening in society with a better, more supernatural outlook. So a perfect example, I think, comes to mind of the Little Sisters of the Poor. Mm-hmm. And when the Affordable Care Act was promoting this idea of a contraceptive mandate to require coverage for contraceptives, all of a sudden we get this beautiful organization of religious order of nuns that serve the elderly poor, explaining the basis of the church's teaching on life, on human sexuality, and their kind of stalwart stance on wanting to operate consistent with belief is allowing for a more important conversation to be had, not only to protect their conscience rights, but also for allow people to tap into their own conscience in thinking about what's the role of the government and what is their role in advancing different issues, especially the pro-life issue.
Yeah, and the Little Sisters of the Poor were great plaintiffs. they were so innocent and so fresh, and you just wanted to sit and believe everything that they said. And I think they caught a lot of people by surprise and won a lot of people over because of their single-mindedness in following Christ and in following their faith. They had no other axe to grind.
And they just wanted to continue to do good. A Beckett law that represented the Little Sisters of the Poor. I am a number one fan of this religious freedom group. They've represented successfully several groups before the Supreme Court, including the Catholic Social Services of Philadelphia, which is another group that had been serving the foster care population in the city of brotherly love for over 50 years. And city officials wanted the agency to certify as foster parents same-sex couples. And the agency said, we can't do that consistent with our understanding of traditional marriage. And so we're happy to refer families to any of the other agencies working with the city, which is a common practice among foster care placement agencies, but we can't act at odds with our beliefs. That was, again, in the end, the Supreme Court handed the agency a victory based on the unique nature of the contract that Catholic Social Services had with the city of Philadelphia. But I point out later, the agency and the city came to an agreement, a specific agreement, saying that they will not force Catholic Social Services to go at odds with their understanding of marriage. They would allow that to happen. That case is a great example of a victory that took the next step, which was a lasting victory for needy children, for people that are open to serving as foster parents. And it's a great and wonderful example on how defending religious freedom can continue to advance the cause of the most needy and vulnerable amongst us.
Yeah, I followed that Philadelphia case. My family's originally from Philadelphia, so I had some interest in it. The city of brotherly love. We can talk about that later. But anyway, there was a lot of anti-Catholic animus in that particular case that the officials in Philadelphia were spouting.
You're right, and it's sad because many of the city officials were raised Catholic. Some continue to identify as Catholic. Mm-hmm. That's an interesting wrinkle that we're finding in a lot of these conflicts. Is people who have a Christian upbringing or even continue to identify as Catholic. For example, President Biden often are pushing policies that are contrary to Catholic teaching and doing so very aggressively. They're not looking to accommodate the religious beliefs of social service agencies or even individual believers. And that's a very important hallmark of our legal circumstances where we do allow for accommodation, oftentimes legally required that the government accommodate religious beliefs and when they're advancing policies. So it is curious, the case of Philadelphia, but it's becoming more and more frequent. There's anti-Catholic animus, often out of the mouths of people who were formed in our faith.
Yeah. All right, how does the left try and get around to some of these Supreme Court rules? How are they trying to outfox or outmaneuver the Supreme Court in their decisions in favor of religious liberty?
That's a great question. And oftentimes we think that, we should respect that a Supreme Court decision is binding precedent. It's really the court takes a handful of cases every term, and they do so not just because there's injustice between the parties, but because there's a need to clarify the law. To set precedent. So when the Supreme Court lays down a decision, it's not just resolving the case at hand, but it's to guide the future. What we are seeing in the religious freedom space is that progressives in particular are looking for ways to get around precedent. They're trying to analyze precedent in the most narrow way possible, look at a case in the most kind of fact-specific way possible, mm-hmm. as opposed to looking at it for the legal principle that the Supreme Court is identifying. And in many of the cases that I cited in this article, that was happening. The Little Sisters of the Poor have won repeatedly before the Supreme Court. Not once, not twice, but 3 times mm-hmm. they won in the Supreme Court. That's also happening in different principles. The area that I've been watching recently is called the ministerial exception, which the Supreme Court has. Why
don't you explain that to our listeners, what the ministerial exception means?
Thank you. It's a really wonderful, the First Amendment's protection. The 2 religion clauses, the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment, work in tandem. And they work in tandem in allowing and protecting the autonomy of churches and church-run organizations. The Supreme Court recognized this in identifying something called the ministerial exception, which basically says that the government can't second-guess hiring or firing or any personnel decisions made by a church. Basically, the government can't stick its nose into those decisions. Those are internal decisions. A perfect example would be when the bishop decides to move one priest from one parish to another. Maybe the priest isn't pleased with that, but he can't go to court to complain about that. That's an internal decision. If we broaden it, we can see in these cases it's been applied in the context of church-run schools. First, a school that was run by a Lutheran church, and then 2 schools that were run by the Catholic Church in California. And the court said that certain teaching positions are equivalent to being a minister. And so decisions that are made regarding those positions can't be questioned in court, whether they're raised for violations of anti-discrimination law or wrongful termination. They can't be brought because those are core to how a church is basically running its business and advancing its spreading of the faith. So those, like I mentioned before, 2 big decisions in recent years from the Supreme Court, but the lower courts are continuing to get cases where aggrieved teachers are complaining for violation of anti-discrimination laws in positions that were clearly covered by this exception. And the most recent one, I wrote about it in the National Review, is a case of a man who was in charge of chapel services in a Christian school in Colorado, and he organized a chapel service where they took on a very aggressive anti-racism position that went beyond what the school wanted. And the chaplain was basically telling parents that they were racist and that they had white privilege. When the school tried to rebuke, discipline, correct this employee, he refused repeatedly, and finally he was fired. He's gone to court, and the school is saying, look, this decision is internal to our decision. It's about the ministry that we're sharing with our young people. And the issue before the Supreme Court to decide whether or not they want to review the case at all is whether discovery can happen or if there's an absolute bar to looking at the case in general. My assessment is it's an absolute bar because asking for court orders for a school or a church to turn over documentation puts the government into the files of a church or a church-run school, and that's really not what the First Amendment was envisioning what could happen.
Very good.
Yeah. Now, you also mentioned, I think, in the article, this case in Maine where the parents could not use state money to put their children into a parochial school, even though you could put the kids in any other school. I think Maine had a situation where there were some places where they didn't have high schools, and so they paid or allowed or paid for parents to place their children in other schools, and Maine said they weren't going to do that. They weren't going to allow that.
You're right. This is a very interesting conflict that's been happening where states are doing variations of school choice. In this case, it was in a school choice program, a voucher program for families where they didn't have a local public school because of the rural nature of the area in which the family was living. And they would allow children to take a voucher to a range of different schools, private schools, nearby public schools, but they wouldn't allow the family to use it if the school was deemed to be a, quote, sectarian school, which if anyone knows their history from the late 1800s, the Blaine Amendments, Maine's rule wasn't a Blaine Amendment, but this was back in the 1800s, there was great anti-Catholic bias against Catholic parochial schools, and many states enacted laws that would restrict funding to exclude Catholic schools from public funds. Maine's law was newer. It was in the 1980s instead of the 1880s. And
that is where Blaine was from, by the way.
Maine?
It was Maine, yes.
So ironic. Blaine was from Maine.
Yeah.
But what was interesting about this case is that the Supreme Court said, hey, that's a violation of the First Amendment free exercise guarantee. And should have been the end of the story, but local officials, state officials in Maine now are saying some of these religious schools are violating the state's very broadly defined anti-discrimination laws that include sexual orientation and gender identity because they hold true to traditional Catholic or Christian understandings of the human person, of marriage. So it's kind of like they're trying to take another bite at the apple. I do think that the Supreme Court, if they review this case, will see it as being a different affront to the free exercise guarantee. But we're finding more and more these conflicts where instead of accommodating beliefs, especially traditional Christian beliefs, state and federal officials are demanding what I like to call ideological conformity, or as Pope Francis calls it, ideological colonization.
Yeah, it's kind of like a giant whack-a-mole game. You win one and it pops up someplace else in a different form. You got to hit it again and then pops up another place. And it seems like it's never ending. But we're glad that people like you and the Beckett Fund and others are on top of it and are fighting it for us, and we certainly appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We are pretty much out of time here, so I want to thank you for coming back again. I hope we treated you well again, and you'll come back because you're always full of so much information that we love to pass that on to our readers. The article was called, as I have it here, How the Progressive Left Attempts to Outmaneuver the Supreme Court. Well worth your reading. I hope you get a chance to find it out there and to read it for yourself. Andrea, thank you for joining us again. We certainly appreciate your coming here. And like I say, we're going to be happy to have you back again sometime.
Well, I'd love to join you again, and thanks for the invitation. Very
good. Thank you very much. This is Andrea Picciotti-Bayer, who is the religious freedom expert and also the legal analyst for EWTN News. All right. We will be right back after these messages. You're listening to Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio. And we are back. You're listening to Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio, and we have with us right now Dr. Jules Gomes, who is the Rome correspondent for Church Militant and St. Michael's Media, with a very disturbing story that's coming out of Australia. And Jules, when I talked to you the other day, you said you found this very disturbing, even as you were writing it. So why don't you explain to our listeners what is going on in Australia that makes this such a disturbing story?
Deacon Mike, first of all, thank you for having me on.
Certainly.
And as I told you the other day, I was mildly traumatized by this because we are talking about a first world democratic country where Christianity and the church has been thriving for, decades, if not centuries. And here we have the government of the Australian Capital Territory virtually seizing, capturing an independent Catholic hospital, the Calvary Public Hospital, which is run by the Sisters of the Little Company of Mary, and basically confiscating this, something that does not happen in democratic countries.
Wow.
Now, why are they doing this?
They are spinning this and saying that they're doing it because, they want to create an alternative hospital on a bigger site so that the citizens of Canberra will have much better facilities. But that's all hogwash because, we all need hospitals, and they could have this very prestigious hospital which has been totally dedicated to the citizens of Canberra. They could simply build another government hospital in addition to this Catholic hospital. The real reason is that in April there was a report it was called the Inquiry into Abortion and Reproductive Choice in the Australian Capital Territory. And this report was very negative. In fact, they had a separate section, an entire section on stigma and harassment, which pointed fingers to the Calvary Public Hospital and said that, since you're not providing abortion, you're not killing babies, we cannot let you run this hospital with government funding anymore, and we want to close you down. That was the primary reason, but there are other reasons which we can talk about.
Go ahead.
Yeah, let's hear some more of those, because as I read the story, I knew that there had to be something bubbling up over time.
And I think he has contacts there on the ground. Now, he's coming to us from Rome right now, but he's got contacts in Australia. Right. So Go ahead. What are some of the other reasons?
Well, we do have very good sources in Australia, and they have been, many of them faithful Catholic priests who have been extremely disturbed by the creeping totalitarianism of the Australian government, particularly over the COVID-19 pandemic period. Now, the other reason, which is, again, very revealing, is that the Chief Minister of the Australian Capital Territory, his name is Andrew Barr. He is the first openly homosexual head of state in Australia ever, and he is the one who has led the forced takeover of the hospital because he's militantly pro-LGBT, anti-Catholic, and he is furious that the Catholic Church takes such a strong position on abortion and on, homosexuality. So he said, for example, I quote, he was, when he won the election, he openly kissed his partner, Anthony, his husband, quote unquote, in front of everybody in 2020. And he said, my husband, Anthony, you're my rock. My life is so much better since we got married. And he basically said this on television. He said that I don't need saving, by the church. We homosexuals don't need saving. And that was kind of very pointed remark against Christianity.
Yeah, that sounds anti-Christian, that there's a lot of anti-Christian animus in that. So I take it then that one of the reasons why they want this hospital taken over is not only because of abortion, but probably because the hospital will not, if they're following Catholic ethics, will not provide trans surgeries.
Oh, absolutely, almost certainly. The hospital will not bow to the trans agenda and will not provide not just surgeries, but also things like puberty blockers and all this sort of thing. And thank God, Canberra has a really good Archbishop, Archbishop Christopher Prowse, who, has taken a stand. Sadly, during the COVID pandemic, many of the priests told us that the bishops had, really bowed to Caesar wholesale. But they are now recognizing that what they did was really gave the state the rope with which to hang them. And Archbishop Christopher Prowse has now woken up and is combating the state's move to compulsory acquire the hospital.
Now, I understand the legislation that was enacted in Australia required the state to take over the hospital, I think, by July 3rd or on July 3rd?
Yes.
Is there any legal action being taken now by Australian Catholics or the Archdiocese to prevent that from happening?
Well, that is unclear at the moment, but Archbishop Prowse has said that he will challenge this. I don't know if he's going to go down a legal route, because what happened is in 2010, the then Chief Minister, Katie Gallagher, signed a contract, I think it was a 100-year contract with the government, and 76 years still remain on the contract. So in a sense, by the way, this Catholic hospital has already been offering high-quality patient care for the last 44 years. So because this could be legally seen as a breach of contract, I'm almost certain that the Archbishop and the diocese will take the state and the chief minister to court.
Okay. So that brings up my question. I'm the people person on this particular program, and I wonder, Mr. Gomes, what are the people of Canberra and the employees of the hospital going to do? What are their options under this takeover? Will they get the same kind of care? Will they get to keep their jobs? Will they want to keep their jobs?
Well, Gina, that is a very good question, because thank God that has been topmost on the Archbishop's list of concerns. In fact, he openly said that his biggest concern was for these 1,800 workers and their families, wondering what's going to happen to them. Now, what the government is doing is the government is saying, of course, we are not going to abandon these workers. They can come and work at our new hospital. But we all know that Catholic hospital and care workers, doctors, nurses, medical professionals, they choose to work in Catholic hospitals, even at lesser salaries, because they're committed to Catholic ethics. And they know they will be protected, for example, if they take a stand against abortion or contraception or trans, a surgery. But the problem is that when they go to this new hospital, they will have all their rights snatched away from them. So is it really worth their while, jumping ship and going into this new situation?
Well, I understand that this is a political decision by the head of department, in essence. Are there any? Do the people have any recourse in terms of an election? Can they elect someone that might be able to halt this opportunity? And if they have that chance, how soon will that be before them?
I don't think there's going to be any elections for the next 3 or 4 years. And the problem is, again, Catholicism and Christianity is now a minority religion in Australia. Even if people are culturally or nominally Catholic, many of them don't really follow the moral and ethical teaching of the Catholic Church. So we've had leaders, chief ministers of the various states in Australia, for example, openly, they profess to be Catholic, like Joe Biden, but then they openly say that, they're on with abortion, gay rights, trans rights, etc., etc. So their faith doesn't make a difference. And again, the bishops, won't take a stand and ban them from coming to communion or anything of that sort. So there's really no Christian leadership in that country coming from the Catholic Church. And so the future doesn't really look terribly bright.
All right, now, this territory in Australia that is doing this is not a state. This is a territory, and it sounds to me it's something like our District of Columbia that is doing this. So this is not the whole state or the whole country of Australia doing it. Is there a movement by the Australian bishops, the group of all the bishops, to try and fight this, whether legally or politically or what?
I don't think there is at the moment, but there could be very soon, because Archbishop Prowse hinted at that. And he said this, I quote him, he said, "I'm also concerned that this action, based on obsessive government control, would deprive future Catholic generations in Canberra of the choice of hospital care, and it could set the scene for future acquisitions of any faith-based facility or indeed any faith-based enterprise, including education or social welfare." So bishops around Australia, and the climate, the political climate is very similar in other states as well. We know there are states that have wanted to take away the right to the seal of confession and force, and the Archbishop of Sydney has been fighting this, and force priests to reveal, in the case of child abuse cases, the identity and the content of the confession made by a paedophile, for example. So the Archbishop Christopher Prowse is setting the scene here, and he's telling the other bishops and archbishops that what's happening here, if it does happen, and it's most likely to happen, could set the scene for what is going to happen to you in each of your states and territories.
Okay, now you're in Rome at this point. Is there anything that the Vatican is issuing or stating about what is going on in Australia here?
Well, the saddest part of this whole thing, Deacon Mike, is that the Vatican, especially under Pope Francis, seems to cozy up with these dictators, and I'm going to call them dictators, like Justin Trudeau and Andrew Barr, the others. Particularly, this has spiked after COVID. And it is not even willing, the Pope is not even willing to give them a slap on the wrist when it comes to, the anti-Catholic agenda. So I'm afraid and, deeply disheartened when I say this, that the climate here in terms of standing for Christian faith and acting as the bulwark of Catholicism, particularly when Christians are being persecuted in different parts of the world, doesn't matter Australia or China, there is no voice from the Vatican condemning what's happening.
Well,
even worse, going along with what is happening and giving these people a pat on the head or pat on the back rather than a real rap on the knuckles.
Yeah, there should be a nuncio to Australia. Do you know if the nuncio has tried to intervene in any way?
No, I don't think the nuncio is in a position to do this unless the bishops request him to do so.
Okay.
And knowing that the Vatican is not likely to interfere or intervene, the Archbishop of Canberra won't really talk to the nuncio and get him to put political or diplomatic pressure.
Okay.
That's my impression.
Okay. Now, what do your sources say that the reaction of the press is in Australia to all of this?
The reaction of the press, as we know, particularly, from the time Cardinal George Pell was falsely accused of abusing children, the reaction of the mainstream media is by and large anti-Catholic, and particularly when it comes to an issue like abortion. The Catholics and other Christians are dismissed wholesale, as bigoted, old-fashioned dinosaurs, when we stand for, the sanctity of life. Mm-hmm. So there isn't, apart from a few blogs, stray blogs, there isn't any thing from the media. There is a channel, I think it's Sky Australia, where there are fairly conservative, Tucker Carlson-like commentators. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if they have taken up this issue.
Okay. Well, now, listening to the story, and it kind of repeats itself over and over again in a number of different instances, it sounds like COVID was used to be able to get the nose of the camel under the tent. And now the rest of the camel is crawling in, and we don't know what to do about it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Absolutely. And Australia, Canada and New Zealand were probably the three worst of the, to use your own metaphor, of the camel's nose and the camel's body. In fact, during COVID, they got most of the camel's body through. And the bishops, instead of standing against this, totalitarianism by stealth, they submitted wholesale. They were co-opted, and they joined in oppressing their own faithful clergy and laity who really wanted to get on with life as normal.
Wow. Well, Dr. Jules, we're just about out of time now. I want to thank you for joining us, and we're going to follow up on this story and see how far it goes, because I think it sends out a lot of warning signals for Catholics around the world where we're faced with governments that are not friendly toward us and that are willing to do almost anything to be able to protect abortion and trans rights and things like that, including taking over Catholic institutions. And I'm sure it's not going to end with hospitals. It's going to continue to schools and other things if we're not careful.
Thank you. Thank you, Deacon Mike, and thank you, Gina, for having me on your show.
Certainly.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much for joining us, and we will have you back to follow up when we find out more about what is going on.
How this resolves itself. Sure. Thank you, Jules.
And Gina and I will be right back after these messages. You're listening to Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio. All right, and we are back now. You're listening to Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio. Gina, an interesting program today, especially the last guest we had dealing with the church or the hospital in Australia, and we should mention that he was calling from Rome. That's where we found him. We tracked him down, and he was in Rome.
I heard we had to get him a special phone.
We had to get a special phone to talk to him, so we got him.
I think the theme from both of our guests today shows
Andrea is very good at this stuff.
Oh, she follows it so much. Yes. Yeah, I've seen her on EWTN too, and she's just good. Yeah. And I think what they both our guests have pointed out to us is the degradation of character of our leaders across the country and in our communities, and it requires us to really take a look at who we're electing into these places of office. Not only are they not true to their faith, they are also not loyal to their constitution, mm-hmm. and they are more, how can I say this, more about inflating their own secular social status by embracing or promoting an ideology than they are in maintaining their faith or their loyalty to the Constitution.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
No, that's the note I was just making here, that they have no faith, only an ideology. And that's what they follow, is that ideology.
But I think it's worse than that. I think that's surrounded in sin, so much pride and
sinful ideology.
Yes. Yeah. And it doesn't merit for the good of the people ever.
No. And they don't respect anybody who has a differing belief. That's one of the things that we found in the United States over the past couple of years. Everybody's screaming at one another. Nobody has any respect for what the other side is saying. We have to be able to understand. When I was teaching college and students would get into an argument over something, they'd get into, not an argument, a debate. But what I would do is when I saw that they were not debating the point, they were missing the point, I would ask one student, you tell me what his statement is. You tell me what his argument is. Repeat his argument to me. And then have the other guy do the same thing.
And they couldn't do it
because they weren't listening. Yeah,
that's a great exercise.
So I always had them try and repeat what the other side was saying so we could see that at least they understood. And that didn't always work out well. Like I say, they didn't understand. And we know where this is headed. I mean, history is repeating itself. I mean, we have clear examples of the trends, these kinds of trends, and what the end result becomes. And so it's important for us to, A, continue to pray, and B, to speak out about our faith and about the, what am I trying to say, disordered conditions that we're embracing. Country, we have right now. And we have to pray for our leaders. We have to pray that God will somehow, the Holy Spirit will give them some type of wisdom into at least understanding what the other side is putting up with, because that's not happening now. You're right. It's all about ideology. None of it is about common sense or attempt to conciliate with your brother.
Your fellow man.
Your fellow man.
That's right. The true basis of tenets of Christianity. Love one another.
Right. All right. I think we're just about out of time now, so let's end with our Defender's Prayer. St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray, and do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, thrust into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Reminder, you can catch me every week in The Wanderer, and our podcasts are on iowacatholicradio.com. If you miss us, check up with the Man Up program with Joe Stopoulos every Monday at 9 a.m. Until next time, have a blessed and peaceful week.
Our freedom of conscience and religion is being challenged by laws and regulations imposed by secular society. Faith on Trial with Defender of the Faith, Deacon Mike Mano. Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio, iowacatholicradio.com, and the Iowa Catholic Radio app.